A political whirlpool for France's presidential candidates as they turn an Amiens factory into a PR battleground. France adds its voice to those concluding that sarin gas was used by Syrian government forces in an attack on civilians last month that killed more than 80 people. And Venezuela withdraws from the Organization of American States as the country enters a fifth week of violent demonstrations. Hello, good to have you with us. I'm Belle Lupton here with all the latest for you tonight. Starting here in France, where a clothes drying factory became a battleground earlier between France's two presidential candidates. Production at the Whirlpool plant in Amiens is planned to move to Poland later this year, and workers have been picketing outside the factory. Marine Le Pen took a last-minute decision to upstage Emmanuel Macron by joining them, as Charles Pellegrin reports.
The two pictures couldn't be more different. Emmanuel Macron having a quiet meeting with a few Whirlpool union representatives just before Marine Le Pen made a stunning appearance on the picket line, mingling with a crowd of disgruntled workers.
Emmanuel Macron came here and had no intention of meeting with the employees and joining the picket line. I thought that was proof of the huge contempt he has for what the employees are going through.
The far-right leader's surprise move immediately put the centrist candidate on the back foot, having to explain why he decided not to visit the site.
I was here for over an hour with the Whirlpool union representatives. I was next to the site because the company refused to give us access. Madame Le Pen, on the other hand, is here for political ends because she's haranguing political activists in a car park.
Back on said car park, the crowd was swaying away from Macron.
We didn't want promises, we wanted his support. We didn't want him to say the plant won't close. We just wanted him to support us as fellow Amiennois, to talk about us, here's what's happening to Whirlpool, and he didn't do that.
He won't help us.
And Marine Le Pen?
I guess she has good ideas, but still, I guess I would trust her more than I trust him.
And that's when Macron took to Twitter to say that he would meet with employees at the site after all. Him and the world's press. By that point, the reception was frosty at best, and the smell of burning tires was filling the air.
Do you smell that, Mr. Macron? That's a smell of hard work. They've been waiting for you a long time here.
Yes, I came at the time I thought was right.
The candidate ended up spending an hour talking to workers, broadcasting it live on Facebook. By the time he shook their hands to say goodbye, the booze had slightly subsided.
Well, Macron's next stop on the campaign trail was in nearby Arras, where he held a rally. Our correspondent Claire Williams was there. She sent this update.
Emmanuel Macron is in his home region here in the north of France, but he's not managed to win over hearts and minds everywhere here. People in this room are mostly favourable. They're supporters of him. That's why they came down to hear him speak. But outside of this room, we're very much in Marine Le Pen National Front territory. Now, what Emmanuel Macron has been telling people here tonight is that Marine Le Pen is not an authentic, real candidate and that she will betray the hopes and that she's selling dreams to people here. He said, look, don't forget she was a woman who was born into money. She was born into politics. She was born into the National Front Party. He says he's the one who has the winning formula of mixing left and right policies to make France stronger and to make France a stronger engagement in the world and in Europe. But you've got to remember, this is still a region that votes favourably for Marine Le Pen. Emmanuel Macron does have his work cut out here.
Well, with 10 days until the second round of voting, politicians from across the board have been calling on voters to unite against far-right Marine Le Pen. But as Ellen Gainsford reports, many are still planning to abstain.
With only 11 days to go until the second round of the French election, the spectre of abstention is looming. Here in Marseille, some voters are making the decision to choose neither candidate.
We don't agree with either candidate. Basically, we'll abstain.
There'll be lots of blank ballots, I think.
A sentiment that's been trending on Twitter. The hashtag Sans moi le 7 Mai, without me on May 7th, has been used more than 200,000 times. Far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who was defeated in the first round of voting, has surprised many by refusing to endorse either candidate. Instead, asking his supporters' opinion, using an online survey.
Option 1, I vote with a blank ballot. Option 2, I vote for Macron. Option 3, I abstain.
While the right-wing Les Républicains party and even former President Nicolas Sarkozy have called for their supporters to vote for Emmanuel Macron in the second round. But not everyone's pleased with this advice.
We don't have to follow them. We're old enough to make our own decisions, to know who we want to vote for.
Abstention in the first round stood at 23%, and that figure could climb in the runoff.
The possibility of high abstention rates in the second round is made likely by the never-before-seen selection of candidates, after both the traditional party candidates lost, and more simply that 55% of people who voted on Sunday won't find their candidate on the ballot paper in the second round.
In the final days of their campaign, Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron will have to keep battling for every vote.
France has joined Turkey, the US and the UK in concluding that sarin gas was used by Syrian government forces in an attack on civilians last month. More than 80 people were killed and another 500 injured when the chemical gas was dropped on the town of Khan Sheikhoun.
The attack killed over 80 people. And for France's foreign affairs minister, it's clear how it was carried out and who was behind it.
There is no doubt that sarin gas was used. There is also no doubt about the responsibility of the Syrian regime, given the way that the sarin was produced.
This is based on a report by French intelligence services which compared samples collected in Khan Sheikhoun with another sarin attack in the suburbs of Damascus in 2013, which killed over 100 people. The same conclusion had been reached in an investigation by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Our work in Syria is not yet finished. It's of grave concern that we continue to see reports of the use of chemical weapons. The international community has unanimously called for the perpetrators to be brought to justice.
The Syrian regime denies claims they used sarin, saying instead that they targeted a rebel weapons depot that could have contained chemical weapons. It also claims that it destroyed its chemical weapons arsenal following the 2013 attack and an agreement with Russia and the United States.
Turkish police have arrested more than 1,000 people in a new wave of purges. Authorities have issued arrest warrants for more than 3,000 others, claiming they have links to exiled cleric Fethullah Gulen, who President Erdogan accuses of orchestrating a coup in 2016. In Venezuela, anti-Maduro protesters are setting their sights on downtown Caracas. They want to bring a month of violent demonstrations into the president's heartland. More than 27 people have been killed in Venezuela's worst violence since Maduro came to power in 2014. Well, now the country has announced it's leaving the Organization of American States in protest at what it calls US-led campaigns against Venezuela's socialist government. Simon Harding reports on the latest violence.
The crisis continues to spiral out of control. Mass protests once again shook the capital Caracas as thousands of people, both for and against President Maduro, took to the streets. Violent clashes with police once again marred the marches as tear gas and rubber bullets were used to disperse crowds.
We live horribly. The situation in Venezuela is really bad. I believe that by demonstrating, we are sending an SOS message to the world. We are not going to give up.
The opposition vowed to march to the centre of the capital to deliver a message to the ombudsman, who is meant to stand up for citizens' rights, but whom they have tagged as the defender of the dictator. Previous attempts to reach downtown Caracas have failed after violent confrontations with the police.
Since this government came to power, everything has worsened. They've been there for 18 to 19 years. In that time, they've benefited, but for the rest of us, it's like we don't exist. I can't take it anymore. That's why I'm here to defend my children and my family's future.
Earlier on Wednesday, Maduro had claimed the dead protesters were the direct result of the opposition's incitement to violence. Anxiety has grown as Venezuela's chief prosecutor called for both sides to refrain from violence. However, if the opposition reached the center of Caracas, a Maduro bastion, then both camps are expected to clash heavily.
Well, Anatoly Kurmanev has been following those protests from Caracas for us. Earlier, we asked him how far the opposition was planning to continue.
I think the opposition has surprised even themselves by being able to stay in the streets for this long. This is now the fourth week of protest. Pretty much every day, still millions of people come out on the streets in Caracas and thousands more across the country. But people do seem much more determined to see this through than in the protest before. This is a Caribbean country, a warm-hearted country. Before the protest here, people take selfies and go out for lunch at the mall afterwards. And the atmosphere is very different this time around. People are angry, people are determined, and people really want to get rid of this government. Majority of the people want to get rid of this government, which we see is increasingly dictatorial.
The US president has led an unusual security briefing on the threat posed by North Korea. Washington has begun installing a controversial missile defense system in South Korea, which prompted unrest in the south and further warnings from China. Martin Pollard explains.
This Wednesday, in a highly unusual move, all US senators went to a meeting in the White House. Called by Donald Trump, it was a security briefing on North Korea's nuclear threat. THAAD, the US's anti-missile defense system in South Korea, almost certainly came up. Its installation has now begun, and Washington says it'll be operational in days. But this is happening amid fierce protests.
It is unconstitutional because they have not received consent from the National Congress, and it is illegal because they are in breach of domestic, environmental, administrative and land-related laws.
China has also reiterated its opposition to THAAD and to the growing US Navy presence in the region.
China strongly urges the United States and South Korea to cancel the deployment of the THAAD system and withdraw the equipment. China will resolutely take necessary steps to protect its interests.
And there's another reason to fear for the long-term future of THAAD. On May the 9th, South Korea will hold a presidential election. One of the favourites, Moon Jae-in, has suggested, if elected, he'd adjust Seoul's THAAD policy.
On the issue of THAAD, we need a balanced diplomacy that enables us to protect the South Korea-US alliance while not damaging our relations with China.
North Korea will also be the subject of a UN Security Council meeting this Friday. It'll be chaired by the US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. He's expected to push for tougher sanctions against Pyongyang.
Uganda's High Court has sent a jailed academic and critic of the president back to prison, clearing the way for a compulsory medical examination. Stella Nyanzi has been in prison for 2 weeks since she was charged with electronic communications offences. She used her popular Facebook page to criticise President Yoweri Museveni and his wife for breaking an election pledge to offer free sanitary pads to schoolgirls. Nyanzi's lawyers say authorities are aiming to have the lecturer declared as mad in order to confine her as a mental patient. And finally, Spain has been marking 80 years since the bombing of Guernica, which took place during the Spanish Civil War. You may know the name from the painting it inspired, Picasso's ambitious and haunting reminder of the world's first recorded deliberate attack on civilians. In 1937, Nazi German planes supporting the fascist forces of Spain's General Franco bombed the Basque market town of Guernica. At least 300 people were killed in 4 hours, hundreds more wounded. Well, earlier today in that same town, people gathered for a minute's silence to remember the fallen. And around the world, they'll be remembering the fallen in Picasso's painting. I'll be back in 15 minutes with all the latest for you. Do join us then on France 24.